Yeah, that's how I feel too. Um, so here we are, and I don't normally do healthcare, and it's quite outside my comfort zone to a certain extent. But what's a great theme of this last couple of days is that there's no difference really whether it's healthcare or someone. Can someone let Sarah in? She's edit that bit out; it'll be fine. So the laws of physics don't change. People don't change. We are the same people whether we're in the workplace, whether in the hospital or schools, and sound behaves in exactly the same way. So one of the good things about this kind of forum that we can all get together in is we're just seeing how we can use the tools from one into another sector, and that's no different to here. So what we're going to be talking about is a hospital. It's like any hospital in the UK. It's pretty run down, pretty grotty. They're knocking it down in a few years' time and building a new one. But in the short term, what they're doing is going through and refurbishing wards. And so here we have Priory Ward 4, not the most inspiring hospital corridor, pretty gloomy, light not very good. But this is a ward for people who suffered strokes. So they're recovering here, and we were asked by Ecofon to carry out an investigation here, to carry out measurements before it was refurbished and afterward. So quite simple, but also quite interesting as well, and probably more interesting than we expected it was going to be. The corridor had a metal ceiling. We have huge problems in the UK with infection control, and one of the main problems is the infection control officer and the person who decides, because it tends to differ from one hospital to the next. It amazed me in that last presentation that you had everything nice and clean, and then you have mineral fibre circles stuck on magnets to the underside of the ceiling where you can get dust on the top and it will attract all sorts of germs. You'd never get away with that in England, I don't think. So infection control is a huge issue. And infection control normally means everything's hard. So we had hard floors, hard walls, these beautiful like shower curtains, the ones that cling to you when you're trying to take a shower in the morning. And what you can see along here, and we'll see in a plan in a minute, the nurse's station is at the head of the corridor, and then there are open to 4-bed rooms off that. And so we took some measurements before and after. So this is the situation. You walk in here. This is the entrance, and you walk down the corridor, and there was a nurse's station up there, and these are where the shower curtains are. These 6-bed wards off there, and the refurbishment was very simple, and it wasn't particularly expensive, and it involved changing the ceiling in the corridor. Very simple. And also the slight remodelling of the nurse's station, because it was a bit enclosed before, now much more open. So that's all it was. Now, because of the infection control, we were only allowed to change the ceiling. We did ask about changing the walls, putting wall panels on there, but that wasn't acceptable. Also, there's a much better quality of light and different use of colour. It looks a much nicer space than it did. It was pretty depressing before. But it's only the corridor that's changed. The bed areas are the same, nothing significant there. So what did we do? Pretty much, yes. In the UK, we don't tend to use ISO 3382. It's not taken off. It's very much a Scandinavian standard as far as we see it. And one of the reasons is it's a real pain to measure. A lot of these things are complicated, and there must be an easier way of doing things, and there is. But we measured all these things because it's good to get lots of data, and it was useful. So we measured simple things like the activity noise in LEQ and Lmax and L90. Also the T20, the reverberation time, the definition and clarity for speech quality, speech transmission index, and then these delightful terms of LPAS4M, D2S, and LPAB, and all that kind of stuff. We did toy with the idea of measuring G as well, but that's just far too complicated. and we don't have an anechoic chamber in which we can go and calibrate our equipment. Therefore, G doesn't really work. G, I think, as a concept, G is fantastic, but in practice, it's dreadful. And lots of people disagree with me on that. But Jack Harvey Clark isn't in here, and he disagrees the most vehemently, and Erling Nielsen does as well. So we took measurements before and after. So the unattended measurements, in a hospital, it's very difficult to take long-term measurements because you're in the way. Whilst it would have been nice to have a tripod stood in the middle of the corridor at 1.5 metres, that wasn't allowed. For some people wanted to walk by. So we were restricted to stealth ninja monitoring, putting the sound level meter above the ceilings and having the microphone sticking down. Now, there are obvious issues there. In that, with it being a metal ceiling before, it was a very reflective plane, so you have to take into account the fact that you're already 3 dB higher than you really should be. But that's what we had, and so we took measurements at various positions along here over long periods of time. So this is the entrance, position 1. For the sake of time, we're just going to look at position 1 and position 4. Position 4 is where the nurse's station was. Position 1 is the furthest point away. And it's interesting to see what happens in these spaces. And we're acousticians, we like graphs, so we did some. And lots of pretty colours. What does it all mean? The most important thing to realise is that this is the L90, that's the LEQ, the L max, and the measurements before were higher than the measurements after. So that's good. If it was the wrong way around, then we'd be in trouble. But let's just think about this. So this is position 1. This is the furthest point away. This is the where you enter the ward. And then this is position 4. This is by the nurse's station. Again, lots of lines. What does it all mean? Well, let's just zoom in slightly and think about this. What did we find? When we looked at the daytime and the nighttime LEQ, and it all went down. But it all went down by quite a predictable amount. So around 6 dB decrease. And that's kind of what you'd expect, because you think, well, okay, well, before we were measuring within the near field of a reflective plane. So 3 dB straight away. We need to accept that we're going to go down. And also, we're going from a corridor which had no soft finishings to a corridor which has got an absorbent plane, so probably another 3 dB to cut the reverberant field down. So we expect to lose 6 dB without anything else. We have a 13 dB there reduction at night time, but I think that's just an outlier. Night time, the activity pattern is different, and it might have been a quiet night. So I think that's not really statistically significant. So the LEQ, the average noise levels in the space, they went down by 6 dB. That's easy. That's an easy win. But just take a look at some of these traces a bit more closely. Now, position 1, as we said, is by the corridor, the furthest point away from anything that's creating noise. Position 4 by the nurse's station. The other thing to bear in mind is, quite unusually, this hospital ward is naturally ventilated. There is no mechanical services plant, so the background noise is low. But that really helped, because one of the most interesting things to me is when you look at the reduction in the L90. The L90 before and after, it's gone down by 9 dB. And that's at the furthest point away from where the noise is created. It's gone down by 6 dB for the LEQ. The L max really hasn't changed because it's the same event. And I think the L max measured near the door will be not from the nurse's station, it will be activities going on nearer. So that hasn't really changed. But you look at position 4 by the nurse's station, there's a big reduction in L90, about 9 dB. And also 9 dB decrease in the LEQ, and a slight reduction in the L90. So what's going on there? the interesting thing is that we can account for 6 dB straight off. 6 dB is due to the physical factors and the physical improvements. But when we start having changes of up to 9 dB, something else is happening in there. And the L90 is one of the most interesting traces. And my mind went straight away to the Essex study. And the Essex study showed that by increasing the amount of absorption in a space, the L90 drops more than you'd expect it to. And it's going beyond the physical, and it's going into the behavioural and the psychoacoustic. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. Remember, there is no mechanical services noise, there is no constant noise. The L90 is from activities going on in that ward. And so when you're the furthest away, that the biggest improvement is in the L90. When you're in the nurse's station where all the noise is going on, the Lmax has reduced quite significantly. Also, the LEQ has reduced significantly, more than you'd expect from just the physical measures alone. The L90 hasn't really changed. So what's that telling us? Well, just park that thought and we'll come back to that. Let's look at that in the context of the other measurements from ISO 3382. So we got our omnidirectional sound source out, we put it on our tripod, we did some measurements, we used ARTA software, very good software, very cheap as well, for post-processing and analysing the results. And we took measurements all the way along the corridor at various positions to see what we were being told. And what did we find? So we're looking at three paths. One, the first path is from the nurse's station at the top of the corridor to the entrance at the other end of the corridor. Then reversing it, going from the entrance to the nurse's station. And then also looking at the nurse's station into one of the open wards. How do things change? There's somebody at the door again. We need a doorbell. So there was a moderate change in noise spread along the corridor, but nothing more than we'd expect. Again, we expect a 3 dB improvement because we're just introducing absorption into the space. Our microphones aren't close to the reflective plane anymore. But one of the interesting things that it tells me is that even though we only treated the corridor, it had quite a significant improvement when you're looking at the noise spread into the open wards. So by controlling the noise at source, that's almost as much benefit as treating the whole transmission path. So when we look at the noise spread into the ward, so that was good. So we don't always need to treat everything. It's as long as we treat the noise at source, then we get a big benefit. What about the T20 and the D50? Well, that was quite a big improvement. So looking in the nurse's station, it was about 0.6, 0.7 seconds TMF before. Now we're down to 0.4, 0.6. In the corridor, there is no such thing as reverberation time in a corridor. It's a long space. Any space where one dimension is more than 6 times another dimension, there is no reverberation time. So it's kind of irrelevant, really. But the interesting thing that we halved the reverberation time at source, and the speech definition increases significantly. We're going up from 63 up to 93 in spaces. The quality of speech improved significantly, and that has a lot of implications as well. And we'll come to that. So it's building this idea of we're changing the physics of the space, and that is changing the physics of the way that sound behaves, but it's also changing the response and the way that people use that space. And this is really just what I wanted to end with some thinking about. Changing the corridor changing the ceiling in a corridor was easy. It was simple. It was cheap. Yet the benefit from that is quite huge. Just by treating the noise at source in the nurse's station, which is the main source of noise, that had a profound impact on the spread of noise from that nurse's station into the wards, along the corridor. Even though the wards themselves weren't treated, just by treating the noise at source, everyone benefits from that. But the most important thing to me, that the most interesting thing is that by lowering the reverberation time, by increasing the amount of absorption at source, you make people quieter. Calm makes calm. And think about the thought process behind that. If you've got a higher signal to noise ratio, because our L90 is reduced and we've got better speech clarity, we don't need to strain our voices. If we use less vocal effort, there is less distortion. It's easier to understand speech even at a moderate signal to noise ratio. And this is well documented. This is the library effect. So at source, there is a big improvement because you don't need to strain your voice. But then at the receiver down at the other end of the corridor by the entrance, that's where the L90 is changed. And essentially what we're looking at is the Lombard effect, but in reverse. We might call it the inverse Lombard effect. And so the consequences of people behaving better at source are then transmitted into a significant improvement at a place distant from that. So everyone in that ward benefits from just a simple improvement. So it's turned into a better place to work for the staff. It's turned into a better place to get better for the patients. There was one concern that okay, if we improve the speech transmission index, is that then going to make more disturbance? Are the patients in the ward going to be more distracted? And I don't think that has happened, because any increase in speech transmission index between the source and receiver there is pretty well cancelled out by the fact that the noise isn't spreading so far anymore. So that's neutralised. So it's a win-win situation. You do something simple, you get something fantastic out of the other end, and that's it. Thank you very much.